MLS club, LA Galaxy. Now, Gab, we're going to start with you because Zlatan's CV really speaks for itself. It is a sparkling CV. So what's the legacy he's leaving behind in Europe?
I think he's going to be remembered as one of the top players that we've seen in the last 15 years. For me, easily one of the top five. So rare to see a man of his size and his presence with that incredible skill set. A man who's won in so many different countries. He's won everywhere he's been. 13 league titles he's won in Holland, in Spain, in Italy, and of course most recently in France. And interesting how I think later in his career he became sort of the Zlatan superhero character, and then people found some aspects of his personality that were often annoying or off-putting before, when he was very much a villain. He almost learned to sort of parody himself, and I think in that sense he became even more popular.
Raf, what about you? Where does he rank? Is he one of your top 5 players in the last 15 years too?
Not quite top 5, because if you're going to go back 15 years, you still got Ronaldo, the original Raul, all these guys. Henry could still coincide with him. But, of course, he left a huge mark in terms of individual skill. A guy who scored so many outrageous goals, making kind of almost karate moves, bringing different kind of movement into football. I think that will forever be remembered. I think, unfortunately for him, because of his constant move, he didn't perhaps leave that much of an imprint on any of the clubs he was at, with the exception of PSG, where he spent 4 years, longer than anywhere else. And of course, he always got a little bit unlucky when it came to the Champions League, always seeming to leave the club, then went on to win the title. So I think he'll be remembered as an outrageously talented individual who played football by himself a little bit. And sometimes I think that was to the detriment of his clubs.
Gab, I see you shaking your head a little bit over there. What didn't you like about what Raf said?
No, I was thinking about what he said about, he won't be remembered apart from PSG as sort of a hero at those clubs. I wonder though if in some ways that doesn't actually enhance his reputation in terms of an individual, because we've seen it so often. We've seen players go to clubs, be successful, and then win all these trophies as passengers because they're at a Bayern or Real Madrid or Juventus or whatnot. His route was different. He was always at a big club, but he always won stuff, and then he moved to another place and he'd win again. To me, that is the most incredible thing. And one of the criticisms was that a lot of his clubs often didn't play great football because it went through him. I mean, we're talking about a guy who could move to a football club and force the club to become all about him, and then 2 years later or 3 years later move somewhere else. To me, he embodies a certain type of footballer in the modern era.
Gentlemen, let's come in studio now. What do you guys think? Paul Mariner, we were speaking about this a little bit earlier. Where does he rank? Top 5 in the last 15 years?
I think if you factor in what does a team need? They need goals. Every coach, every manager, they need somebody who can put the ball in the back of the net. If you look at his goal-scoring record for club football, it's absolutely ridiculous. But what I noted at the bottom of the graphic was 116 games, 62 goals for Sweden. Now, Sweden have not exactly been a powerhouse in world football. So it just shows you at what every single level that he's played, every single league that he's gone to, he's entertained the fans and he's pleased the coach over and over because of the guaranteed goals that you get from a player like this. That's what impresses me about it.
Stevie?
There are very few players, and people talk about Zlatan going and joining good teams, big-name teams with big-name players, but there are very few players that can actually go to a big club and actually raise the standards. And every single club he's gone to, he's raised the standard of where that club has been.
Well, where do you think he's done that the most then? Because when you think of Zlatan, as we said, he is quite the traveller. Which club do you identify him with the most?
Well, you don't. I think Raf said it best. He hasn't particularly left a legacy at any club. If you were to push me, I'd maybe say PSG. But other than that, he's just gone and being the man. He's been the man at, 5 clubs? How many players do you know that have done that?
I think what was staggering, and I admit I was one of the guys that wrote him up. I didn't think that he would be a success at Manchester United. And I know people say, well, it was coming towards the end of his career. Even so, as soon as he got into that building, I knew that everyone knew he was the man.
Gab's shaking his head again.
I'm not bothered because Gab, did you think that he was going to score 15 plus goals at Manchester United last year?
Yeah, I did. I actually made a bet that he would score 20. But I think this in some ways fits into the Zlatan narrative, right? When he was, I've been living in England for a long time, and for a long time it was about, oh look, he's a flat track bully. Look at the foreign weirdo with the long hair and stuff, and then he goes and he plays a proper team in the Champions League and he loses, and there's no way he could ever do it in England or against England defenses. And then he goes and he plays, Sweden play England, and he scores what? I think he scores 3 goals, 4 goals. He's got that absurd overhead kick from 40 yards out, and then all of a sudden people pay attention. And then he comes and he moves to an English club, and not just any English club, but the biggest English club of all, in a year that which is supposed to be their rebirth with Mourinho and whatever else, and he dominates. He certainly dominated for the first 6-7 months of the season, and then of course later he gets hurt. I mean, to me, this is Superman stuff that he delivered, and he does have imperfections, and maybe he could have been even greater if he'd made different choices earlier in his career. But this is pretty impressive to keep going at this age, to play at this level. I mean, you can only admire his professionalism.
Well, comparing Zlatan to Superman is a big thing, but I love that comparison, Gab. But Raf, do you like that comparison?
I do like the comparison. I'm just wondering what his kryptonite was. It was probably Pep, Lex Luthor, his enemy. But I just, the one problem I have with him is that I feel that he was one of the first guys that played football almost for himself. Now, to a certain extent, you don't care because he's so good, it doesn't matter. But I think when it comes to bullying teammates and saying, unless you give me the ball, I'm not going to talk to you anymore, or everything has to go through me, I think that's where it's getting into a little bit of a oppressive kind of environment and a kind of almost abusive relationship. And I think you have to be almost needy of that situation. I think, to be honest, I think United's need reflected where they were. Yes, Zlatan was still a great player. Yes, United is still a big team. But I think a few years ago, they wouldn't have dreamed of throwing all their eggs into this big basket called Zlatan. So I think this is a bit of a reflection of how their standards had slipped a little bit as well.
Well, you spoke about what could possibly be his kryptonite, and I think one of the things that he had said, I think when he was going to Barcelona, he said top of the list was that he wanted to win the Champions League, something he didn't get to do, Raf. Do you think that that's going to leave a massive blemish on his record?
No, I don't think so. I think, the Champions League, you need to get lucky. Some of those moves weren't down to him. Juventus, with their problems, it was nothing to do with him. Other clubs had to cash in. PSG, you could say, maybe the team weren't quite at his standard. That's not his fault. It's not something that's going to hold him back. No one's going to say, with Sweden, he didn't win the Euros, he was a failure. I mean, it would be unrealistic to say that. But I think maybe that he wasn't that much of a team player could have had even more success. And I think maybe looking back, despite his personal issues with Guardiola, if he'd found a way to fit in and work with his Barcelona team, we could have seen the best Zlatan of all time with the best team of the last decade. And it's a shame in a way that didn't happen.
Gab's facial expressions are just making the show today. Gab, but let's go to you about Italy, of course. When you think of Zlatan in Italy, what team do they most associate him with?
I said that's a really good question because, he went to Juventus. They won the title for both years. Obviously, they were later stripped of the title, but, to Juve fans, they won those titles on the pitch. To Zlatan, he won them on the pitch. There's a sense that, if this hadn't happened, if he'd stayed, we would have won the Champions League. If we'd not been hit by Calciopoli. He goes to Inter. They play horrendous football, but they win 3 league titles. And then he leaves, and then they win the treble. And in some ways, there's a school of thought that says, well, if he hadn't left, we wouldn't have gotten Samuel Eto'o, and we wouldn't have won the treble. And then to go to Milan, and really I think maybe that's the team that he carried the most at any point of his career. A Milan side that by that point were they had financial difficulties. They were selling players. what he and of course Thiago Silva as well did in delivering yet another title at that stage. I think certainly for the Italian chapter of his career, maybe arguably that's where he had the most impact. But he's still somebody who's, if not loved, very much cherished, I think, by fans of all three clubs.
All right, back to you guys now in studio, because again, reflecting on the last 15 years and when we talk about the top players, because the last 15 years is a lot of time. We've seen people like Lionel Messi, small name, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, etc., Suarez, the list goes on. Is the name Zlatan and what he's done enough to trump a couple of these players and at least make it into your top fives?
Lex, I think what we've got to factor in, as the lads have been saying, is where he's done it. He hasn't been afraid. Whether.
But Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Maras.
But the thing is, look at his goal-scoring record. Look at the joy that he's brought to world football.
But he doesn't even have a Champions League, and a lot of people say that results and trophies do matter.
We can sit here and say he's a better player than him. He's a better player than he's a better player. The fact is that Zlatan's been doing it for 15 seasons. Ronaldinho didn't do it for 15 seasons, so does that mean that Zlatan's better than Ronaldinho? Listen, that whole thing is a personal choice, but you cannot argue. You're talking about top five. He's top five for the length of time he's done it for, no question.
Top three?
It would be an argument.
It depends what your criteria is going to be. If it's all about scoring goals and raising the profile of himself and everybody around him, when he walks into a football, when he walks into a football dressing room, you're judged immediately.